Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat some interesting figures and leading lights in this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. Today, we are delighted to have a very special guest, Michelle Glogovac, author and podcast matchmaker. Thank you very much for joining us, Michelle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you both.
Oh, well, we are thrilled to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. Thanks, Roland, and thanks, Michelle, for coming on. Yeah, it's exciting to have another, podcaster on the show to talk to us. And I think that a lot of authors say when they contact me, sometimes I'll get authors that want to talk about their books, and this isn't really that the forum for that, because the audience that listen to us are primarily authors, and not that authors don't read, but we're mainly a podcast about writing and publishing and all that stuff. So but authors wanting to talk about their books is a really important part of the marketing plan that they should have. So I think it's awesome that you have a service where you're sort of matching authors up with different podcasts that they can be on. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started with all this?
Sure. So for 18 years, I had nothing to do with podcasts, didn't even know how to listen to one. I sold jet fuel to corporate flight departments. I needed a part-time job in college and I could walk to the airport. So that is what I did. And then I just ended up staying in the industry. I have two kids that are a year and 3 weeks apart and ended up getting laid off when the youngest was less than a year old. And at that point, I said to myself, what can I do that's going to make the world a better place for them? Because I really felt like saving the wealthy money to fly around in their corporate jets was not doing something to benefit my kids in the long run. So I started out, what am I going to do? And a friend said, you should listen to this business and life coach. She's launching a podcast on finding your passion, your purpose. And I said, that's great, but how do I listen to it? And that is in 2018 when I discovered the purple Apple icon on my phone that allowed me to listen to podcasts. And I started listening, but also sharing her content and letting my followers know that, I was on this path to figuring out what it is that I want to do. What do I enjoy where I can also financially contribute to my household while staying at home with my kids? And she ended up reaching out to me and said, do you want to pitch me to be on other shows? Because obviously my content resonates with you. You're already sharing it. I think you could do this. And I went, what? That's a thing. Okay. Yes. And I dove in, started pitching her, but I'm one of those people that needs to know everything, every facet that goes into whatever I'm doing. So I took a podcasting course. I decided that I didn't like editing, so I did not touch that, but I learned everything that goes into producing a podcast. And that made me fall in love even more with the pitching side. So I went all in to pitch clients to be on other shows. So I've been doing that for over 5 years now, of creating these matches so that it's mutually beneficial for the host and the guest. So everybody's getting something out of it, while the listener's also getting a story that's going to inspire them, motivate them, educate them to do something more. And the beauty of it all is that it's free. So to me, this is the best way to do something for my kids' future, to make the world a better place. And I like to say that we're changing lives one voice at a time by sharing these stories.
That's great. I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but I think, finding the right one, everybody's got different sort of passions, different tastes and whatever. And so you can have lots of podcasts about the same topic, but they appeal to different people. I mean, we can't all listen to them all, right? But it's great. So, you put people together with the right one, and that's the kind of the listeners that listen to that one, get that experience that they are looking for, and I think that's a really cool idea, really good service.
And it goes along with, I get a lot of clients who say, but, my story is so similar to other people's. And, is this all oversaturated? I was asked last week in a lecture I did of, are there too many podcasts? Is it oversaturated? Why do people keep launching them? And I say the same thing, whether you're a host or you're a guest, your story is unique to you. And the way you present it is going to be different than however anyone else can do it. And so that's why I think it's great that we have so many podcasts and we have so many people who can tell their stories, authors who can talk about their books and the way they've written it, because nobody's doing it the same way. And that's really what's remarkable about podcasts.
We were just talking about how the wonderful thing about self-publishing is you don't need to reach 1 million people to be a successful self-published author. And I think it's the same with podcasts. There are millions of podcasts and everyone's like, oh, everyone's got a podcast now. But you know what? If you find one that does exactly what it is you are into, then it's wonderful.
Exactly. And even though there are millions that are listed, there aren't millions that are active that are doing it, because people are finding out that to host a podcast takes work, time, and money. So we will see the increase, that we see the dip when people realize how much effort goes into a podcast. And I think that's really what I try to get across to my guests, to my clients who are guests, is that, this is someone inviting you into their home to have dinner. They're cooking this meal for you by allowing you to speak to their warm audience who already trusts them. So you need to thank them and show up in the best way possible, just as if you were going over to their house to eat a meal and converse and thank them properly, with a gift.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. It's funny because like even within a podcast, you can have guests that are talking about the same sort of thing. I mean, it's different with when you have an author podcast, they're talking about their books, and obviously the books are different. But with our podcast, we're having authors come on and they're talking about author related stuff, publishing related stuff. But you can have people come on that want to talk about the same topic that you've already talked about, but it can be a completely different podcast because, like you said, they have those different experiences, different levels of expertise, different ideas about how these things work, and it still adds value to the topic because it's a whole different perspective.
Exactly. And there's other people who do what I do, but I do it differently.
Better.
I'm I like to think so. I'm always striving to do better. I'm always striving to give more, to see what is it that we can do that's more personal. And that goes right down to listening to a show before we even pitch it, which is something I tell all clients to do. I tell everyone in my book, you need to go listen to the podcast, because you've got people out there who are pitching and they're not listening. They're not even reading the show description. And these are simple things that you can do so easily.
That happens all the time. I get people pitching from different services that put people on podcasts, and it's so clear that they have no clue whatsoever what our podcast is about. They'll pitch something that just often it's an author talking about their book, but sometimes it's not even that. And and I'm just like, you've obviously never listened to our podcast. So
yeah. I get them myself all day long, which was great content for my book. I did include them, but even my show name, it's My Simplified Life, and people automatically think that it's a decluttering organization, Marie Kondo type thing, and it has absolutely nothing to do with my home or being organized. So you can tell right away who's listened, who's even read the description just from that.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about your book then.
So my book came out January 19th. It is called How to Get on Podcasts. And although it sounds like it's a how-to kind of, I think the title is deceiving because it comes across as just a business, let's get on podcasts. It's much more than that. It is a step-by-step guide with exercises on how to create your unique speaking topics, how to write the proper pitch, how to create your branded media kit, how to show up as a great guest, how to repurpose your interviews into greater marketing content. All of it is compared to the dinner party, as I mentioned before. And I compare your speaking topics. I put them in friend categories. So you've got your business friend, you've got your longtime friend since kindergarten, and how those all relate to topics that you can speak on. And it's a lot of me that's involved. You can hear my voice throughout. So when the audiobook comes out, you'll definitely hear my voice in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great. I think that that's what people really need, because there is more. And I've said this before when I try. So often how I get guests, because I'm lazy, I guess, is I often I'll get them from our existing audience of authors, right? Because we're Hidden Gems runs author services. We've been doing that for close to 10 years now, and I have a list of 5,000 authors that continues to grow, and they all have something to say, right? So often I send out a newsletter every Friday, and so once in a while I'll put something in there saying, hey, you want to come and talk to us on the podcast, let us know. And I sent one out a few weeks ago, and I went through sort of the points about why an author would want to come on to this podcast, because it's not about talking to your book. So it's a different kind of pitch. The idea that you're coming on to talk to other authors, it's not necessarily going to sell your book. For you, you're writing a topic that that is relevant to this podcast, so we would discuss it. But if somebody's a fantasy author or a thriller author, we're not necessarily really even mentioning their book, other than saying that they're an author or whatever, right? So the pitch is sort of that idea of coming on and talking to your peers, getting making contacts, having people know you. There's always opportunities with when you know people in the industry. Everyone, they're like, hey, I know that author. Something will happen. They'll think of you when something else comes up. Other opportunities will come up. The authors are readers. They might read your book anyways. Like, there's all these reasons. But like you mentioned with the media kits, yeah, you can take portions of that and put it on your website, put it in your on your social media. There's all sorts of ways that you can leverage a podcast other than just simply going on and being a guest and then forgetting about it.
And you should, because to me, by repurposing it and pulling out quotes from a transcript and creating a blog post, you're not only creating content for yourself that keeps you fresh and out there, but you're saying thank you to the host who's had you on by spreading that message to your audience and creating the ripple effect of now more people can be directed to that podcast and listen to it. Your Instagram followers, your Facebook followers, all of your social media followers are now seeing also this podcast. And so they will tune in and maybe they want to listen to more. So to me, you have to do more than, I say, if you put it in your Instagram stories for 24 hours, it's very lazy and it's not okay. You need to do more so that it's there permanently. And I also love that you brought up, that this is a show where you're talking about your writing and not necessarily your book. And that's something that I really try to make sure all of my author clients understand as well, is that people want to get to know the person, the author. So we're not going on to give all the spoilers away of your book. We don't even have to talk about your book, because at the end of every single interview I have ever listened to, they say, well, how can people find you? Where can they find you? And that's when you can say, oh, I wrote a book and here's where it is. And so you don't have to talk about the book. Let people get to know you, because especially authors, we don't get to know them. And, we know celebrities, we see them on TV and we recognize them on the street. Yet how often do we take that photo that's on the jacket cover and recognize that person when we run into them at Starbucks or something like that? So that's why I feel it's so great and important to have, podcasts. Let us get to know the authors behind these books that we love.
Yeah, and I've talked about that before when I've mentioned to authors that social media. One of the things that I've noticed that authors, that self-published authors do wrong a lot. I absolutely did it wrong at the beginning. Is they use social media as a way to sell their book, and the authors that are doing it right, that are doing social right, are the ones that I've seen being the most successful, like commercially. They're selling more books, and then you look at what they're doing on social, and they're not just saying, hey, I have a new book, come buy it, right? Because that they're not going to do. People on social, they want to get to know you as an author. They want to know who you are, who it is that they're reading. Even if you're writing under a pen name, you can still share things. Listen, you can make stuff up. Nobody's going to know. But you can still, if you wanted to, be authentic. You don't have to use real names. You can still talk about experiences that happen to you. You can be as personal or as impersonal as you want. But the more you're sharing on social, I think the closer your audience gets to you, and the more they're willing to support you when you do have something to sell. And it's not like, oh, every time he posts, he's just talking about his new book, so block, unfollow, because it's not interesting to them. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's really, really important, I think, for an author is getting your audience to know you.
And it's that human connection. I don't want to say we guilt people into it, but if I really like you and what you're doing, and we've created this relationship, even if it's just on social media, then I'm more apt to be interested in purchasing whatever it is that you're selling, because there's now that genuine interaction, friendship, relationship, whatever it is, versus you just saw me, hawking my book out there and that's it. There's nothing to grab me and pull at those heartstrings.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that authors then say is, oh, I don't know what to write about. So when you're going on all these podcasts, so that gives you that content, right? I was just on this podcast, come listen, I talked about this, I talked about that, share a clip of it or whatever, right? It's just another way for them to come up with content, which is always sort of the biggest issue, right? What do I write about? I got to tweet, or I got to do this twice a day or 3 times a week. I don't know what to write, so content.
Awesome. I find that so interesting. I wrote a blog post about the 3 things actually, I think it's 4 things that will make people buy a book. And one of them is connection. Like, I have authors who I've interacted with, and even if I'm not in the mood for it, if they publish a book, I'm going to buy it to support them, because it's like you're kind of buying into them and what they represent. So, and podcasts are a wonderful way to do that. I mean, people probably listen to us and might even like us personally and support us personally because of what they've heard in the podcast. So
it's so true. And I can attest to this with my book coming out. I've had moms at school come up and say, I just bought your book. And they're never been on a podcast. I don't even know if they listen to podcasts, but they have gone out and bought my book simply to support me. So if that's what's happening on the school playground, then I guarantee you people on social media interacting with you who are already interested in the content you are providing will be buying your book because of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it's very understandable. People really, really do want to genuinely support the people that they know. And even though you don't necessarily know an author because you follow them on social media, you create that connection through sharing bits about yourself and your personal life. And I think that really works. So, okay, so how do you get the authors that you put onto the podcast? Like, how are you finding them?
The clients, it's all been referral based. A lot of authors referring, a lot of book coaches, publishers, even, of me just being out there and promoting authors in general, having authors on my own show, and promoting books. I'm a book lover. I always have been ever since I was a child. And so I'm constantly reading something, and I will promote them, whether or not I have them on my show, whether or not they are a client. I want to support the authors that I read. And so that's how they're connecting with me. When COVID hit and everyone was at home, I saw the tweets of, nobody's coming to my book signing's canceled. And I thought, but what about podcasts? Because we saw the increase in podcasts launching. So why couldn't authors do a podcast book tour instead of doing an in-person tour? And essentially, you're going to reach a ton more people, and it's going to be cheaper than flying around the country and going to these in-person signings where maybe one person shows up, maybe 100 people show up. You just never know. Versus going onto a podcast, and you can see in certain cases, I have a subscription to Podchaser, so I can see how many downloads a month a single episode's getting. So maybe you just talked to 1,000 people and that took you 30 minutes and you didn't even leave your home. So the potential reach is far greater with a podcast book tour than spending the money and time on planes and traveling around. And that's fun. Trust me, I think it's so exciting to go and do a book signing or to go and meet an author. But at the same time, you can get a lot of leverage and really bang for your buck by doing podcast interviews and having it be from home, whether or not we're in a COVID situation, we're all stuck at home, or you want to get a lot of these done before your book even launches.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't even think, is anyone even doing physical book tours anymore? I don't
I've seen some, and there's a lot of money involved because I'm going, oh my gosh, you're on an airplane a lot. There's hotels there. That's a big expense.
And are people showing up to them? Like, I don't even know anymore.
I don't know, but I saw one the other day where you actually had to buy a ticket to go, and it's going to be local to me. And I went, oh, how much is it? Because it's on a Sunday. So do I want to spend a Sunday? It was $125. You got a copy of the book, but I could go buy the book for 20 bucks. So yeah. And of course, $125, you have to pay for, that book tour that this individual is doing. So I don't know.
Yeah. And then for the actual podcast that you refer them to, are those also coming to you via referrals, or how do you find those?
So I have a Rolodex now, and I'm speaking my age because I did used to have a Rolodex on my desk back in the day, of shows that we have pitched to and had clients on. And so we can pull from that, which also saves us time because we've already listened to the episode. We have that established relationship. So it's a quicker pitch versus ones we're constantly on a daily basis looking up, researching new podcasts that we haven't heard. We're listening to those episodes, creating a personalized pitch. And that's one of the key things that I say in the book and also do in my agency is that every pitch that goes out is unique to the host, not to the client. That means that we're not copying and pasting every client's pitch. That means that every single host is getting something unique to them. We're relating to an episode that is specific to their show, what we got out of it, and how we think the client can benefit the audience. So all of that goes into it. And that's really how we're consistently building up the database. We're researching on Podchaser, on Listen Notes, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even Instagram, because you can use the hashtags to search out podcasts, which people forget.
Right. Yeah. I don't even put ours on Instagram, but I should.
Well, when this goes live, it'll be on Instagram, just so you know.
Perfect.
I'll be sharing it.
It's funny because I didn't even make the connection that you work with Allison, that because she pitched you as, like, she didn't say, I work with Michelle. She just said, I have another contact to send your way. And then she, when she sent me an email, I didn't really pay attention to the actual email. So I didn't even realize that you guys were working together until you were just talking about it. But I can attest to the fact that, yes, when Allison sends me something, she's one of the ones that I definitely pay attention to, because she does make sure that it is relevant, not only like a relevant person, but she gives me like a list of different talking points that they can discuss on the show, that aren't like, it's about her book or whatever. She actually gives me things that they're experts to talk about. So I think that I really appreciate that, because that's really, she's pretty much the only one doing that. So
thank you. I appreciate that. That's our goal.
Yeah, for sure. So how many connections do you make in, I don't know, some time period, a week? Are you?
I can tell we've looked at, I keep getting more and more in depth of, we book about 1,000 interviews a year. And last year we reached over 1 million podcast listeners. Based on what we've already booked this year, we will exceed 1 million listeners, hopefully by next month. We booked a fairly large show already that's recorded. So that number will go up, which means that next year has to be even higher. So.
Wow. So when an author contacts you, can we talk a bit about sort of how that process works? And I assume that this is a service, is a business that you run. So I guess you're charging the author for the service of connecting them to podcasts, and are they paying like per visit that they make to a podcast, per recording, or like a monthly fee, or how does that work?
It's a one-time investment. It can be split up over a few months, and they will come to me. We'll have a little 30-minute intro of, what's your book about? What are your goals? When's it launching? Here's what it looks like to work with me. Once a contract is signed and paid for, then I start reading their book, and I read it cover to cover. I don't skip any parts because I want to know exactly what it is we're pitching. There's also an onboarding form that doesn't just talk about the book. I want to know about the author and what's your journey been like? What do you do? What have you done? What does the world think of you? And then I go and I stalk them on the internet. I Google them so I can find out even more than what they've already shared. Sometimes it's surprising to them what I find. And then we have an hour-long Zoom where I come up with questions, whether it's related to them, to their book. I tell them, what I've loved. And usually I'm emailing them while I'm reading too, of like, oh, this was a really good part. I really enjoyed this, or I can't believe this. And then I create a branded media kit that's already in the onboarding packet. I ask them their hex codes, their colors, their fonts, all of that. So I can create it's about a 6-page media kit that looks just like their website. I include the book cover. Normally a media kit's 1 page, and that has everything from the bio, the speaking topics, the headshot, all the social media links, past interviews, and that's included. But then we go more in depth, as you know, with a synopsis of the book, with details of the ISBN number, when does it launch, who's the publisher, all of those kinds of things. So it's more extensive. And then from there, we've also discussed, who is your ideal reader? Who is it that we want to reach? What's your target audience? And then we research their podcasts. We create a Trello board, an online project management tool that they have access to. And it's like a giant bulletin board with Post-its where we're putting up potentials to pitch, and we're moving them along when a pitch has been sent, a follow-up's been sent, when we've got an interview link, when things go live. So it's all housed there. And then we also download a transcript of every interview. We identify at least 3 quotes that the client has said that we think should be repurposed into marketing content. Send that all to them along with any assets that the host has given us. And we ask them to share it just as we will. So that way they can build up their brand.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Well, that's great.
I mean,
you're really maximizing the usage of the stuff you create.
I really try to. I want to. And it goes back to me saying that I'm always trying to do more and give more and be better. So, every client of mine will actually I give them an onboarding gift, and they get a microphone because I want them to show up sounding professional and not, with something in their ears. And you're like, oh man, what were you doing? Because they're essentially representing me just as I'm representing them. So I want them to show up as that good professional guest that is asked to come back, and that our pitches are asked to, yes, we want more of your clients because they show up in the right way.
Yeah, that's awesome. You give them a microphone.
It's not the most expensive, but it doesn't have to be. So
no, it just has to sound good. You don't need top of the line. I mean, especially if they're only doing a few or whatever, right? So is this something that you do per book then? Like they have a contract per book, or is that like a lifetime contract?
So for authors, I have it's called the Podcast Book Tour package, and we book a minimum of 15 podcast interviews. I forgot to mention that part. And working together, we allow for 3 to 4 months, and that gives me time to also read the book, depending on how many authors I have that have just signed on in a month. Sometimes it's 3 or 4. So there's a lot of reading involved. And so we do 3 to 4 months, and the minimum is 15 interviews that we want booked within the 3-month period. We always try to go over. And the one thing that we can't guarantee, and we don't guarantee because I don't like the legal word, our goal is to get that 15. But, we don't know when the podcast will record. We don't know when they will go live. And we will request that they go live around the time that the book launches. But a book sale is a book sale no matter when it happens. So, we aim for these things. But if a host can't take you for the next 3 months, but you're booked in 3 months, then, you're booked out in 3 months, and then we don't know when it'll go live. So those are the only things that we can't guarantee.
Yeah, some things are going to be outside of your control for sure.
Yeah, we had one actually last week say, yeah, we're booked until 2025 in the summer. I've never had that happen before. So
wow.
You never know.
Yeah, often we're recording only a week or two in advance, although lately we've been sort of building up a bunch of them and in the queue. So that's easier for sure. You like to have sort of that backlog so that you're not scrambling, but you also you want to maintain that balance, because otherwise, if you're booking it out months in advance, it's not that we're really coinciding with people's books that often, because we're not necessarily talking about their books. Sometimes we are, but still, like when somebody records something, they don't necessarily want to record it now and then have it come out in 3 or 4 months. So we do our best to sort of keep it within a couple months at least. So I get that though. So when the authors after they've done this, then I guess so then they end up with all this content, and then if they want to do another book with you in the future, another book tour, they would just book the same package, I guess, or is there?
Yeah, they'd book the same package, and we start all over again, because I'll be reading another book, and just, it's a little shorter time because the media kit's already done. And so it just needs to be updated. I have one client, she's just come back for her second podcast book tour. And so we revamped it to look a little bit more like the second book than it does the first book. But both book covers are included. All the links are there as well. But it can be a little quicker if we've already worked together, and, I already know you, so you don't have to tell me your story all over again.
And you don't have to necessarily get another microphone from you. So
exactly. Yes.
So do authors have a way of, they can do it on their own, I guess, but to track sort of like any kind of metrics of whether some of these podcast appearances are sort of converting into sales?
But they really need to be tracking their own sales. And I've asked clients this many times, is this helping? I don't know. I don't look at my sales. I'm like, okay, well, I can't help you there, but I recommend creating a unique bit.ly link for each episode that you do. So that way, if you do want to track it, you can see how many did go, to that link and click on it, whether they bought your book or visited the website, because that's really the only way you can track it. Besides somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, I bought your book because I heard you on this podcast, or I'll get people DMing me saying, oh, I saw you said that you loved this book, so I went and I bought it. And I will tell the author, not to give myself props, but so that they know you're getting book sales from Instagram or the show or whatever it is. So that way you can track it and know that people are buying because of those different things.
Yeah, it would be hard to be accurate on that, because people are going to hear about the podcast from many different sources. And then, like you said, at the end, when they say, hey, read their book, they might just follow it from there, directly from the podcast. And then you don't know. I guess you can maybe look at sort of that the time variance, where it's like, okay, I know my sales are at this level normally, I appeared on this podcast, and then they went up this amount, so I can attribute sort of that difference to my appearance.
Right, unless they all go live at the same time, because we've requested that they go live around the same date. So
that's true. That's the same issue people have with newsletters too. When they stack them, then they don't know which one is doing well.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's with the problem with all marketing. I think we've been kind of spoiled by the .com revolution, where everyone thinks, oh, we can track all clicks, but at the end of the day, the people who see you in one place, it might take them several more times seeing you before they decide to buy, and then they might just go straight to Amazon or whatever and bypass all your tracking. So you're sitting there thinking it doesn't work, but actually it does.
Right. I actually signed up. This is funny. When my book was being pre-ordered, I signed up for affiliate links on Amazon and bookshop.org just to see if people were coming to my website and then buying the book from there. And I can say that they did, because I got checks from both already. So that's another way to, figure out, where are your book sales coming from? Do you have, a unique affiliate code on your website that it's only on the website per se? So it's one more way to figure it out, but there's a lot.
I find that so. In terms of your background as a writer, like, what is it that inspired you to follow down this path?
I've always wanted to write a book. As a reader, I think that books are like, they're the coolest. I've never wanted to like star in a movie, but I've always wanted to see my name on a book cover. And I interviewed a book coach on my podcast and said that I would love to write something. And but I don't know where to start or what to do. And she said, well, you should write your first book on what you know and what you're known for. And I went, well, podcasts. Okay, that makes it easy. And I literally walked away from the interview and wrote out my chapter outlines. I hired a book coach for 3 months to write the proposal, and we knocked out the first 2 chapters. And from there, I was querying agents, got an agent. Well, she went off to go find a publisher. I wrote the rest of the book in less than a year. And that was it. And I think that the nice part is you do hear a lot of me in the book because it's just my personality that comes out. So it became an out-of-body experience. As I read the audiobook, I went, who wrote this? Like, this is really good. This is funny. And apparently I am funny sometimes. And it was just, it comes out in the book. So that was really my only experience in doing it. And we'll see what comes next, because I'm already starting to work on some more projects, because it's been fun and I enjoy it. And who doesn't love a book with their name on the cover?
It is great. And then I keep thinking, you know, when you've got kids or grandkids, at some point in the future, they might find this dusty old paperback and brush it off. And it's like, oh, look, Grandpa wrote a book.
Yes. And my kids have been a part of this through the whole process. They were teeny tiny when I started my podcast. So they've even been on the show. They knew, you know, that I'm writing a book. And when the books arrived, they both cried. They're 7 and 8, that just total tears. They didn't know that it's dedicated to them, that there's a paragraph in the acknowledgments to them. So they've told everyone, my mom's an author, which I'm like, oh, please, you know, really, guys? So yeah, they're very excited about it. So who knows what comes down in the legacy?
Absolutely. That's great. One thing I wanted to ask, though, with the authors that come to you, do you find that they are self-published for the most part, or are they coming from, you know, trad publishers that are saying, hey, this should be part of your marketing plan?
It's a total mix, self-published, hybrid, and traditional. Yeah, it's a complete mix, and it's pretty even across the board as how it's distributed.
Because I was wondering, because I guess if you're working with a trad publisher, they might, you know, put the bill for it as part of.
So far, they haven't.
No? Okay.
No, and the authors wish that they did. And you know, I would say there's more pushback from traditional publishers and authors working with me, and I think that's because they have their in-house publicity teams who are pitching podcasts. But if you've received a pitch from one of them, then you've seen the difference in our pitches versus theirs. So it's something that I'm hoping that the book alone changes the industry standards of how you pitch a podcast, whether it's for an author or any other type of guest, because it can't just be about the book. I don't believe the pitch should be simply, here's the book, it's coming out. Like, what are we going to talk to the book? No, we're talking to the person. So, you know, to really make it more about the person and changing it in that kind of sense.
Yeah, it's funny, every time, you know, you ask about whether traditional publishers are paying for something or doing something, and it's always no. You know, I keep wondering why anyone is continuing to go that route. They take almost all the money, and what they do for you is becoming less and less and less. It's amazing, really.
And I went the traditional route. So I know that I was not given a marketing budget. There's no PR team. And in fact, the business side of McGraw-Hill went down during the publishing of my book. So I went through 2 editors, and now I have 1 contact there who's in marketing. So I can attest to all of that. I went the traditional route, not that you asked, but just so people know, simply because I wanted the name to go behind the book, because I felt like saying I wrote about how to get on podcasts wasn't going to stick enough. I felt like people, and I've seen just the looks on faces when I say I wrote a book, it's how to get on podcasts. And by the way, McGraw-Hill published it. And then suddenly I'm taken more seriously. That was really my reasoning behind doing this. Self-publishing and hybrid, it's definitely consideration for the next book now that this one is out. But that was my whole reason for wanting to go traditional. And I did give myself a timeline that if this was not picked up by a publisher by X date, I was just going to self-publish it. But I really wanted to have that name behind me so that people understood that this was the real deal. This is the standard that needs to be in podcast pitching.
Yeah, there still is a stigma of the idea that self-publishing is less than a traditional publisher with for a lot of readers more than the authors themselves. They realize that there doesn't have to be any difference. You can pay for professional editing yourself. You don't need the traditional publisher's editor. You don't need a cover designer. You can get all that stuff yourself. The only difference is you're making most of the money instead of giving it to someone else. But from a reader perspective, there's still, and it's changing, but there is still sort of that feeling that it's a more professional, it's a real book because it was published by a traditional author. Yeah.
And I think I'm very much like over traditional publishers. However, I think when it comes to a book like yours that is so tied into what it is you do as a business, there is that legitimacy. I mean, McGraw-Hill is like, I used to work opposite their headquarters in New York City, massive big building on Avenue of the Americas, and it's like they're the real deal. So you have a book published by them, it's like, yeah, she is somebody you can take seriously. And you might not necessarily make as much, or money wasn't really your consideration. It was that legitimacy.
It really was. Yeah. We'll see how the money goes in 10 years from now, and if I'm still making some. But yeah, it was really getting their name on the book and them getting behind me to say, yeah, this is it.
So
yeah, it's good though. I mean, you have that now. You've seen that experience, and then when you write the next one, you self-publish that, and look at the difference.
Yes.
Then you'll know, right, for next time.
So I think we are approaching the top of the hour. So I think this is probably the perfect time to start wrapping things up. But Michelle, where can people find out more about what it is you do, and where can they find your book and everything like that?
Thank you. The MLGcollective.com is my agency website. You can also go to michelleglogovac.com, which is my personal website. Both websites have all the book information. You can buy the book, how to get on podcasts, everywhere that books are sold.
Excellent. And of course, we will pop a link down below in the description when we post this podcast. In fact, while you're down there, please do leave Michelle a comment and let her know how much you valued everything that she shared with us today. And you can also hit that subscribe button and that like button while you're down there. Craig, before we wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that this is really it's really great to hear from Michelle about this, because like I said, I had written something about this a couple of weeks back to my newsletter, but my ideas about why people would want to go on a podcast were just my ideas about it. So it's gratifying to hear that the expert in the field has a lot of the same ideas and more about why it really is important for authors to get out there on podcasts. So and it's great to hear that there are ways for them to make it easier, because it's not necessarily you want to spend time writing, you don't want to spend time looking for podcasts, figuring out which one is right and pitching that person and blah blah blah. You want to be able to, a lot of authors just want to be able to go to a service and have them do all of that for them and just take that burden off, so they can just go and write the next book. So thanks again for coming on the show. This has been really informative.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Craig. And everyone listening, thank you to you too. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. Until then, cheerio.